Okay, we are here. We are back with a worst to best to talk about one of the best, in my opinion, rock bands of the modern era. And it spans even as far back as the 90s. Queens of the Stone Age have been at it for quite some time. They have had some pretty iconic albums and iconic rock singles for good reason, because they are such a good band, and they have been pretty consistent and prolific with releases for quite some time. Their last album though wasn't like since 2017. So, you know, we're being starved a little bit of some Queens of the Stone Age music, but maybe we will get more music at some point. Until then though, we have to rank these 7 albums that they have put out. I'm talking about the main studio albums that they have put out, none of the other extras that they've released over the years. We're just looking at the main bulk of their discography. Massive band, these guys. They always make it onto festival bills. They always do really well when you see them touring, whatever country they go to. They always sell out big venues. They're just such a massive band, and it almost feels like they could be bigger. Like, as big as they are, it feels like they could be bigger, considering how there is such a craving for, you know, real rock music from the kind of older audience nowadays that you see. You do see that kind of backlash against the pop, the mainstream. People want the old classic rock back. And you would think that this kind of band would appeal to that audience even more today than they might even seem to be doing. I don't know, maybe we'll see with their next album and we'll see what kind of reception it gets. Anyway, I am waffling, and I am probably only stalling just to avoid the backlash that I'm going to get for what is at the bottom of their discography. In my opinion, it is my opinion. Right, we got to get this one out of the way, really. I'm going to get clobbered. Rated R is at the bottom of their discography, in my opinion. Yes, I know it's one of their most acclaimed. And yes, I know if you're a Rate Your Music lover, you will see that it is bolded on Rate Your Music. So you're probably thinking, how dare you, you contrarian? How dare you put this at the bottom? But I'm just speaking how I feel. This album, to me, has some great songs. Lost Art of Keeping a Secret, is really good, really smooth. Really like the smoothness that they go for on some of the tracks. Throughout the discography, actually, like, it seems like each album has that really smooth track that just goes over so well. This is that one on this album. But unfortunately, in my opinion, a lot of the album just isn't very striking. Like, I can't really pick out that many melodies or memorable moments. And, you know, for a rock album to not really have that, when you compare it to, you know, other albums in their discography that have that in spades, it just puts this album at the bottom for me, because I can't really pick out many great moments or memorable moments. There's some bluesy stuff going on, as they do have on some of their other albums too, on Autopilot, but it's not really that exciting or anything really to be getting excited over. It's just some typical blues rock type of stuff. You've got Better, Living Through Chemistry, which just lacks a bite, honestly. Like, tracks like this just don't have that oomph to them that you've heard on other albums that they've put out. And then you reach the closer, man. And this closer, I'm all for a long song. But when there's like a long song closing out the album and you're just waiting for it to end, it's never a good sign. But then the friggin' like cartoonish horns or whatever the hell comes through, it really sounds goofy as fuck. It's just so out of place. It just feels really goofy for no reason. And like I say, the rest of the album, if it was just more memorable and more striking in terms of melodies, or had a bit more of that oomph that we've heard on other albums that I will talk about, I'd rank it higher. But it lacks the two things that the band is really good at and really known for. I just don't know why this album's considered one of their best. It's quite easily the worst one for me. Okay, maybe not as controversial, this one, number 6, Lullabies to Paralyze. I do tend to see this one ranked lower when I watch discography rankings and stuff like that, so this one might not be too controversial. I will say Little Sister, though, one of their best songs. I freaking love this track. This is actually one of the first songs I ever heard by them. Kerrang TV! loved this song. I tell you right now, I heard this every friggin' day when I turned on Kerrang TV. They love this shit. Obviously, I had heard other songs by them at that point, but it was one of the earliest songs I discovered by them. I was really in awe of how like the clock tick-tocky beat kind of like interplays with the and it's like, it sounds so cool. It's one of their most unique songs to date, honestly. Similarly to Rated R though, quite a few of the other tracks lack a bit of bite. I mean, Medication with the muffly vocals. I don't know, man, Josh Homme has such a good voice. To muffle them down like that, to basically sound really stuffy and inaudible, I think it's just an insult to him as a singer. I don't know why it's recorded that kind of way. You Got a Killer Scene is a track that has a really repetitive riff. They're really good actually at repetitive riffs, but sometimes on some of their weaker tracks, you kind of feel like they get a bit stale. Burn the Witch brings back some of that bluesiness I was talking about as well. Every now and then they do touch on this. It sounds very Black Keys though. And then you've got the Someone's in the Wolf, which is a really interesting track where the vocals are really ethereal and really strange sounding. Definitely one of the highlights on the album. Again though, I think much of the album is fine. I prefer it to Rated R, but it does lack a bit of that punch in places. Villains at number 5, yes, what their most recent album is ranking in the top 5 of their discography. Gets a little bit of unnecessary hate, this one. I know a lot of people didn't really take well to it, but I recommend you go back to it. I think you'll be quite surprised at how good some of the grooves are on this one. There's some really sticky choruses and melodies as well. The Way You Used To, I think, is a good track. Although the riff feels a little forced and a little tacked on, I still can't really help but feel like I'm, getting a bit groovy to it. Head Like a Haunted House is really buzzy and upbeat. You've got Fortress, which I think has a pretty cute idea to it. With the lyrical sentiment. If ever your fortress cage, you're always welcome in mine. A little corny, but I quite like the sentiment of that track overall. I think it's a nice metaphor that's woven in throughout. Hideaway, not as, bombastic or as in your face or as memorable, but there are a few moments like that in this album too. I don't think it's a massive improvement on 7 and 6 that I've ranked here, but I think it's actually a little bit better than some people gave it credit for. I think it's decent. I think it's a decent album. And I think it's definitely a step down from the album before this, which I'll get to. But as it stands in their discography, I actually think you've got some really catchy tracks across this album. Well, what do we have here, boys, at number 4? The most overlooked album in this band's discography by quite a margin. The debut, Queens of the Stone Age. This album's so good. It's actually like really good. I mean, Mexicola with the heaviness. They go pretty heavy on this album actually. This is probably the heaviest album, maybe rivaling another one which I'll talk about soon, in the whole discography. But it does feel like a debut as well. Like it feels very rough and gruff and untidy, and it doesn't necessarily feel like they'd hit the heights of where they ended up becoming in terms of their hit singles. There's nothing really like that on this, but as an overall album, the way it flows and the way it runs just really comes together well. I mean, the aim of this album basically seemed to just be, look guys, we're going to be loud, we're going to be brash, we're going to be very rough as well, and it makes for a really good album. It hits some pretty heavy points as well, and it has that kind of like garage feel to it, which I really like. Yeah, I like this one. I don't know why this never gets talked about, but honestly, as a debut album, I think it's really good. And at number 3, probably the most unusual ranking of many people's opinions. I don't think this lines up very well at all, but I really like Era Vulgaris, man. I think it's really, really dirty and filthy, and it is just such a mess of an album. And they know it. They know it's a total mess, and it's so grimy, and it's so... Ugh. You've got Turning on the Screw with the intensity of that guitar. It sounds so weirdly tuned and weirdly menacing in such a strange way, but it sounds so good. You got 666, which has like the garage feel to it. It sounds so rough and gruff. Battery Acid as well. Oh my god, what a fiery track this is. There's just so much of this on the album. It just runs so well. It just always feels a bit, ugh, you know? You know what I mean? When it just feels like, ugh. It sounds messy in the best kind of way, like the debut, but taken a little bit up a notch, you know? Got that kind of even grimier feel to it. I just think this is a really sick album, honestly. Then you get to Make It With You, which is like nothing like the rest of the album. Honestly, it feels so out of place, but I'm okay with it because it feels like you found a pillowy soft cushion in like a pile of debris. That is what this track is. It's just so out of place. It's the softness matching with the rest of the messiness that is this album. Threes and Sevens I think is funny because the riff reminds me of Song 2 by Blur. Not that it's a bad thing, I just think it is funny that it reminds me of that. And then you've got I'm Designer, which I wrote down the lyrics here, which he says, I'm high class, I'm a whore, actually both. There's some funny lyrics on this track, man. Probably one of their funniest songs ever. Yeah, similarly with the debut, these two albums have got to be the most underappreciated across the entire discography of this band's work. I find it quite baffling actually that they're so underappreciated when the music is as good as it is. But maybe it's just a personal preference for me. Maybe it's that actually people haven't listened to these albums in that long because they never really thought much of them to begin with. And now, maybe if they went back, they'd actually think, oh, you know what, I was being a bit harsh on these ones. I don't know, maybe something like that. But for me, this ranks at number 3. The most iconic album of this band's work, Songs for the Deaf, at number 2. I think this would probably rank at number 1 for many people's rankings, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't quite hit number 1 for me, which I'll explain why later, but as an album, this is really good stuff. Just, you can't go wrong with this for 2000s rock. Like, if you were really wanting some rock music of any decade, I think this would probably be quite an easy recommendation from me, even if it isn't ranking at my number 1. It's just got that feel to it, you know? It starts off so hardcore with the piercing screams. Feels totally really new for the band. I mean, they do this every now and then, but just how piercing the first track is so unique for them. It even comes back a little bit with Six Shooter with the screams as well. Definitely for the hardcore fans, this album with these 2 tracks for sure. And then I can't not mention the 3 massive singles from this album. No One Knows, which is probably the most iconic song this band ever made, with that amazing riff. I was talking about the riffs earlier. I was saying that these guys do a really good repetitive riff. Look no further than this track, man. It is immediately hooky and it's gonna stick with you. First It Giveth with the falsetto, that just works so well. After that, you've got some really stoner tracks, actually. They've always been branded as a stoner rock band, which I haven't mentioned throughout this video yet, but you can definitely see why with some of these tracks in the middle of this album. And then Go With The Flow. Go With The Flow. I don't know, you know, recently I've been thinking this might be my favourite song by them ever. I know it's quite an obvious pick, and I know it's, you know, one of their most famous singles, but my god, man, the vocal like layering with the harmonies on the chorus sounds so good. It's just so catchy. Oh man, what a great song. I will say the album loses a bit of steam towards the end. Some of the tracks get quite long by the end, but I still think overall this is a really good album. And in like a parallel universe, this would be as iconic as American Idiot or the Black Parade, you know, Hybrid Theory. You know, those massive like alternative rock albums of the 2000s that people talk about to this day. And while this is a massive album for the 2000s, I'm not, you know, downplaying its influence or how big it was. It's just not as big as American Idiot, for example. And it should be. Like, this should be that kind of album. It should be that bitch, you know? That bad bitch that is on that level, that is on the throne. It should be, because it's that good. But yeah, I guess maybe it didn't quite have its own unique angle in the same way that, you know, something like My Chemical Romance had with their emo, you know, sort of aesthetic, and American Idiot with that hand grenade heart on the cover. Like, there are things that help these kinds of albums gain that sort of, I guess, recognition. Maybe this album didn't quite have that in terms of, you know, the album cover, the album name or whatever. But for me, it's one of the best of the 2000s in the rock category for sure. And number one, my friends, we have Like Clockwork, the best Queens of the Stone Age album, in my opinion. I think as time has gone on, I think as time goes on even further, I don't think this will be considered an unpopular opinion at all. In fact, I think a lot of people would agree with this, eventually, at least anyway. But yeah, this is fantastic, man. Like, the gap that they left between the album releases, like 6 years or something, to come back, to basically come back stronger than you ever have before. Like, that is so admirable to me. From start to end, man, this album is so well put together. It is brilliant. You know, the opening track with the really, really beefy, chunky bass line that goes through, man. I mean, it might be a down-tuned guitar, but it sounds also a bit like a bass. Sometimes it's hard to fully tell, but goodness me, it sounds like Black Sabbath, man. I Sat by the Ocean, once again bringing back the classic repetitive riffs that these guys come up with. And oh my God, it's just so catchy. The chorus is fantastic as well. Just a great song, one of their best songs. The two tracks with the massive grooviness to them, as they do on many of their albums, If I Had a Tail and Smooth Sailing. The falsetto on Smooth Sailing is fantastic. It's just everything they've done on all of their albums, you know, accumulated onto one album, and it's just all so refined. And every track is memorable. Every track hits. Every track feels like a single, honestly, at times. Like some of the other albums I was saying before, you know, with like how, I don't know, maybe Rated R doesn't have the memorability to some of the tracks. Maybe Lullabies as well doesn't quite have the hits that match up to Little Sister, for example. Like, this album is correcting all those things. Like, every track feels memorable. Every track feels really unique and tailor-made to what the band has been doing all this time, but everything just feels refined and done incredibly well. Including My God Is the Sun, which has that menace, that epicness that maybe we've heard on some of their older albums, the kind of gruffer and rougher albums. But again, it just has such a fantastic, you know, epic grand chorus that just elevates it to a new level. And then you've got the haunting closing track as well. It's all downhill from here. The way he sings that in the whispery, faded voice just makes the album feel a lot more theatrical than anything they've ever done before too. That kind of emotive energy that comes through on tracks like this, and some of the other ones as well, just makes it feel like Josh Homme was in a totally different place writing these songs. Perhaps maybe even a darker place, actually, with the way some of the tracks do end up being. But it makes for something brilliant. Yeah, this is quite easily their best album for me. Not an attack on their other albums, by the way, not an attack on people's opinions of their other albums, but just the way it holds a special place for me in the history of rock music, the history of the 2010s as well. I mean, this is up there with one of the best albums of the whole decade for me. So that's how highly I regard this one. It was just going to be really difficult for anything else in their discography to even match this, because of that reputation that I have for it. But yeah, brilliant album. I think even regardless of whether this is number one for you, I think a lot of people that love this band will certainly agree that this is a great album. Very interested to see where it ranks for you and the whole ranking of this band's discography in the comments section though, because as much as I do love this band, I don't talk to many people about them. So I'm kind of interested to see what people think. You know, what is the general consensus? Do you agree with my ranking? Do you disagree? Would love to see all your thoughts in the comments. Would love to see you subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Many more worst to best are on the way. Many more list type of videos are coming up too. So please stick around. I always bring a unique perspective. You might not always agree with me, but I can tell you right now, you will get unique opinions when you watch this channel. So thank you as always. Please subscribe, please comment, have a good day, like the video as well, share it around. Tell me your worst to best. Tell me what I should do a ranking for next. Check out my Patreon. Goodbye.